Hi, DeMarcia. You're about to watch my interview with Trita Parsi from the Quincy Institute. But before you do, please hit like, follow, share down below. It helps us beat the YouTube algorithm. And go to trendsjournal.com. That's trendsjournal.com for the world's top trend forecasts. Thank you, as always, for watching. I'm happy to be here today with Trita Parsi. He is the Executive Vice President from the Quincy Institute. We'll have the links down below. Trita, thank you for joining the Trends Journal, as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
I just read in the New York Times that Iran submitted another proposal through Pakistan to end the war. Trump came out, at least through Caitlin Collins at CNN. She said that Trump was not impressed and will not be going forward with this new proposal. Trita, where do we stand on this war? And what do you see? Are there any negotiable elements of what Iran is willing to compromise on and what it won't? Like, can they meet halfway on any of these issues in your view?
Certainly, this is not a situation in which the current negotiation deadlock is because the two sides, the pathway to a compromise is too difficult, or compromise itself is difficult to envision. The main problem at this point is that Trump has proven himself to be so unreliable, so undisciplined in his diplomacy, changing his goalpost all the time, combined with continuing to believe that he can get some sort of a capitulation on the Iranian side, which is completely unachievable. And then listening to the pro-Israeli crowd and Israeli government that keeps on telling him that there's still some sort of a coercive silver bullet, that if he just pursues that, the Iranians will cave. I mean, this blockade on the blockade that the Israelis and the pro-Israeli group FDD came up with has backfired spectacularly. Trump was actually in a better position than the Iranians during the ceasefire because he had managed to get out of the war. The main pressure on him was off. The Iranians had not managed to get their key objective, which was sanctions relief, because they could only get that through a deal. So Trump could have actually afforded to slow down the pace, knowing that the Iranians were in a relatively tighter position than him. But then instead he adopts this blockade of the blockade that was sold to him by FDD. And what is the result of that? The result of it is that oil prices now during the ceasefire is higher than they were during the war, because the blockade has taken further oil off of the market and ratcheted up tensions. So even though it has put pressure on Iran, it's put more pressure on the American taxpayer and all of the American gas consumers that are now paying $6 or so at the gas stations. So this, the pressure that was taken off of him as a result of the ceasefire, Trump himself put back on himself through this blockade. So I think, to be frank, the problem is not that it is impossible to envision a compromise, is that Trump just doesn't know how to play his cards correctly.
You mentioned the FDD, and I think so many Americans don't understand the influence that the FDD has over our policy towards Israel. I mean, I remember, if there's any update with Iran, you are no doubt going to be reading FDD op-eds in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post. You're going to be seeing them on TV shows pushing their agenda. It's pretty impressive, the influence they have. And also, if I type in, for example, Iran in a Google search for news, you'll see FDD articles pop up, and that's to be remarkable because it's not a news organization, and it still pops up on Google News. But I just wanted to express that.
Absolutely, no, they have. When it comes to pushing matters towards war and away from diplomacy, they've had a tremendous amount of success and influence. And a lot of people in the MAGA base that are more informed are very surprised that even in the Trump 2 administration, despite the fact that they didn't manage to get any people into the NSC as they had done in Trump 1, and despite the fact that a lot of neocons were not supposed to be in key positions in this administration, nevertheless, they have managed to get a tremendous amount of influence, which is to a large part because Trump has chosen to listen to the Israeli government. And the Israeli government and FDD tend to be in sync with each other.
Stephen Walt, the Harvard professor, he wrote, I think it was in Foreign Policy on Monday or Tuesday, and he talked about Marco Rubio and how he has relatively kept his hands somehow clean from the whole Iran mess, by not taking a leading role in negotiations, by not being the face of the war. Trita, in your opinion, do you think that that was a conscious decision by Rubio, that he knew that this was going to be a fiasco and a disaster, and he didn't want to hurt his future presidential prospects? And do you think Vance was the sacrificial lamb by the administration?
Well, I think what happened is that Rubio has actually played his cards brilliantly, managed to put his name on the things that have been deemed successful by the administration, and have had enough political sense to stay away from the things that he realized would be a failure. So he hasn't come out, obviously, in opposition to the war, etc., but he's made sure that he is not seen as a major force behind this decision. J.D. Vance has made sure that he is increasingly understood as having been a major skeptic of the war, which can be costly for him with Trump himself, but it's important for JD when it comes to JD's own base, which tend to be very, very anti-war and very anti-neoconservative influence. But Rubio has successfully managed to make sure that this debacle will not land at his feet.
Where does Trump go from here? Because from people that I've heard speak, other analysts, they said that this is not something that can be a long-standing position. We can't have a blockade on a blockade on a blockade. It's just not possible. It's not a long-term solution, even for months, because of the price of energy and the risks of an escalation. Where do you see this going today, Trita? Do you see this being resolved? Do you see a pause where, let's say, the blockade gets broken down a little bit, and maybe the Strait of Hormuz gets opened, and then they pause and negotiate again? What do you see unfolding from this position that we're in right now?
I can see that the administration will go and renew diplomacy, use the blockade as a claim of saying, look, we're coercing the Iranians into agreement, we are in control, we are winning. Has nothing to do with reality, but they needed something like this in order to be able to make the case that this was a victory. And I have to say, the media is just so unbelievably incompetent in asking the right questions. So I wouldn't begrudge the administration for trying to play their cards that way, because Trump has proven himself to be remarkably successful in distracting the media, redirecting them to things that are not particularly plausible. I mean, we've now been 3 weeks debating as to whether the Iranians have their act together only on the basis of Trump saying so. And plenty of interviews, who's running the country, et cetera. Some of those questions are quite legitimate, but there's absolutely zero evidence that the reason why we have this problem in the negotiations is because of that factor. But that's what Trump has presented, and that's what the media has run with. So if I was Trump, I would be, quite understandable that he thinks that he can just create his own realities, because the media is just so bad at scrutinizing a lot of these different statements and assertions. So I can see that they will use the blockade in order to create a narrative that it was successful, that it forced the Iranians to change, and then go for a deal that would pretty much look the same, if not worse, than what would have happened had there not been a blockade. That path is still there, but it requires him to get really serious about diplomacy, which means that he has to have discipline. He has to stay away from his Truth Social account for some time. He's going to have to adopt reasonable positions instead of maximalist positions. And obviously, from the Iranian side, they're going to have to be able to do the same. And then there's one more thing. Both sides need a narrative of success, a narrative of victory. That's understandable, and it's particularly understandable for the superpower, that it needs to be able to say that it won. And whether it's credible, whether people will buy it or not, is a different story, but the need for it is there. But it's also important to make sure that your narrative of victory is not humiliating the other side, because then it negates the other side's narrative of victory. So both of them are going to have to be able to say that they won without humiliating the other. And that is something that Trump has not shown strong capability for. He really has a tremendous urge of always humiliating the other side. And in this context, that won't work. He can sabotage his entire diplomacy, perhaps even his deal, if he conducts himself that way.
Do you think the Iranians know that they need to give Trump a little bit here? Do you think the Iranian delegation knows that, all right, we want to be able to enrich uranium. We're going to, hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage with during these negotiations. Do you think they know that they need to give Trump something, or do you think that this is like an American, policy position?
No, I suspect that they do. Perhaps they don't fully understand the extent to which they may need to because of Trump's ego. But so, for instance, if you take a look at what happened, what is it now, 3 weekends ago, when the Iranians first tweeted that they're going to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And this was then supposed to be reciprocated by Trump, in which he would say that he's lifting the blockade for the duration of the ceasefire. He didn't. Instead, he declared victory, humiliated the other side, and said that he's keeping the blockade in place. And that, of course, immediately led the Iranians to reclose the Strait of Hormuz and the debacle that we've seen for the last couple of weeks, in which there hasn't been any return to diplomacy. The fact that the Iranians took the first step, which oftentimes can also be one of these things that they can argue about for weeks, they were willing to take the first step and then the US would reciprocate. To me, suggests that they understand Trump's need for that type of a narrative, Trump's need for being able to say that he was successful. And it's very important as well that the Iranians, if this comes to a place in which there can be a deal, that they really tone down some of their own rhetoric that at least was very high during the war itself, in which they were actually going for the humiliation of Trump. That's not going to work. If they do that, they're going to also blow up the path to diplomacy. So I think there is a realization. I think there is a realization within the Trump negotiating team. I'm not so sure that Trump, however, fully grasps and understands the importance of this, but I think others in his team do.
Do we not have anyone else to negotiate beside Witkoff and Kushner? What kind of message does that send to the Iranians that we continue to send the same delegation and that they claim have deep ties to Israel? Netanyahu used to sleep in Kushner's bedroom when he was his boyhood bedroom in New Jersey. So when the Iranians see that, how serious do you think they think that we're taking the negotiations?
Well, this is part of the reason why they're insisting on J.D. Vance attending the talks. They're refusing to continue the negotiations just with Witkoff and with Kushner. They openly view Kushner as an Israeli asset, essentially. This is also part of the reason why in the last couple of weeks we've seen written negotiations in which proposals are being exchanged in writing. It's because they believe that Trump keeps on changing the goalposts, changing what he's promising, that his negotiators don't fully understand some of the technicalities, which has led to misunderstandings, but also because they are worried about Kushner and sabotage efforts by him. By having it in writing, as we have seen in the last 2 or so weeks, it has been designed to minimize the danger of that. But I think the primary concern is that they want to make sure that Trump doesn't negate or backtrack on things that he's already promised. By having it in writing, they aim to minimize that risk.
How important was the comment earlier this week by Frederick Merce about a humiliation for the U.S. diplomacy with the war in Iran? Do you think that the Trump administration, obviously Trump was upset by that. He posted on Truth Social. What kind of message does MERS send? Does it show the U.S. hit the tension with Europe? How did you read that message from MERS? That Iran's humiliation.
More than anything else, I read it as the utter weakness and embarrassment that the German government currently have turned themselves into. Is he wrong in pointing out that this war was wrong, that Trump didn't know what he was doing, that he's created a mess? No, he was not wrong. But Merce was a supporter of this war. He told others that international law does not apply to Iran. He said that Israel was doing Europe's dirty work for it. He was in the White House days after the war started and essentially was nodding along. He is in no position to put this debacle solely at the feet of Trump when he himself was a supporter. But this is what has become of Germany and much of Europe, in which they're essentially turned into nothing more than vassals of the United States. And that's bad for them, but it's also bad for the United States. We don't need partners and allies that are behaving in this way, facilitating America's worst instincts and dumbest decisions. and then turning around and putting all the blame at the feet of the United States, even though they themselves were supportive of it.
I mean, he once said that Israel was doing the world's dirty work when he
Exactly.
with Iran. Yeah. So, Trita, I promised I wouldn't keep you too long. I always enjoy talking to you and getting your insight. Everyone, we're going to have his link down below under the Quincy Institute. Trita, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.